You open this book by saying this book is for all women who have ever been controlled, put down, cheated on, abused, shamed, lied to, used, treated like the eternal underdog, and had their spirit and self-esteem completely snatched away. It's about taking back your power, rediscovering yourself, putting joy, happiness and peace back into your life. And it's about the hardest journey a woman will ever make in her life, learning to love herself. Do you love yourself now?
I am, and it's an everyday healing process that I'm going through. But yeah, I fundamentally do really love myself, and I like myself most importantly now.
But to go so public, why did you want to do that? What do you hope that you will get out of this and people reading the book will get out of this?
Well, I think for me, I kind of had no choice because there were so many salacious headlines about me out there. And, you know, for 2 years, I've kept very, very silent. And I just think if I can help one person that's in a similar situation to what I've been in, then job well done. And I'm also doing this book for my kids because I want my kids to know that being in an abusive relationship is not OK. And there are warning signs and there are helplines and refuges that you can actually get out and find help and educate yourself that, you know what, that wasn't my fault.
You've got to recognise, haven't you, that you're in an abusive relationship, and not everybody does, because it can be very subtle to start with.
Oh, it is very subtle.
When you
doesn't
met...
happen overnight.
Yeah, when you met Stephen, I mean, it was a whirlwind romance.
I thought he was a respectable, honest, loving, giving, caring person. And you have to understand, you know, these men, and it happens the other way around too, they find you, you don't find them. They hunt you down and they seek you out and they find you at your most vulnerable point emotionally and physically, and that's exactly what happened to me.
Did he find you?
I mean, I think so, yeah, definitely. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was heartbroken from ending my relationship with Eddie Murphy, and I was pregnant with his baby. You know, Angel was a couple of months old when he came into my life.
Did he sweep in and kind of go, I'll take care of you? Because often people are very charming.
Very charming, and, you know, these kind of relationships start off with somebody presenting themselves with everything and more that you think that you need. Yeah. And, you know, it ends up being completely different.
I think a lot of people watching this and looking at the Spice Girls, you know, you are scary Spice. Nobody mucks about with scary Spice. And yet when I read that book, I can see the slow process. And as you say, you just had a baby by the man that you describe as the love of your life, Eddie Murphy. You were no longer with him. And suddenly this guy walked in who showed interest in you.
Yeah,
and it was almost like, OK, I am worthy of loving, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, there were so many warning signs and red flags, but when you're in that kind of relationship, which is very abusive on many different levels, you know, you end up taking the blame and thinking that, well, it's your fault and I have to make this marriage work.
Because you did say in the book that you, almost as soon as you married him, you had this wedding in Las Vegas, almost as soon as you married him, you had your doubts. But then you felt you had to kind of put on a show because, well, I've done it now.
Yeah, and almost on my wedding night, things just, well, not almost, things started to happen which were very abusive. But at that point, I didn't understand what that was and I didn't understand how wrong it was. And also, I took the blame on myself and I wasn't about to talk about it with anybody because it's so embarrassing and it's so shameful. So you end up just being in a hamster wheel of trying to make sure everything's OK, but also trying to hide your personal life with your husband. And you're in a constant...
And as you say, you became a good liar.
A very good liar, yeah, because I didn't want anybody to know that what I was going through, and that was just too embarrassing and shameful.
But you're lying to yourself more than anything, aren't you?
Of course,
all the way through that, because I've been in a similar relationship, nowhere near as bad as yours, I don't think, but it's something that you allow to happen. You let it happen, and then you feel embarrassed and you feel ashamed. And it just carries on. And it's not until... This is why people say, well, why didn't you get out of it? But you can't do it until you admit to yourself. Yeah.
Well, my situation, I was also being somewhat blackmailed also. So whenever I would go and leave, there was the whole thing of, well, I'm going to send these videos or I'm going to tell the press exactly what you're like. So I had that hanging over my head and I didn't want to shame my family. I didn't want to have another failed marriage. So I stayed in it for way longer than I should have ever.
And obviously,
stayed with
we're
this
talking
person.
about coercive abuse here, which has now become a proper criminal act. So it's like the mental abuse.
Yeah.
But just describe to us then what day-to-day life with Stephen was like. The thing that struck me was the curtains that you talked about, always living
in darkness. Yeah. And it's kind of still strange to still talk about, but I think it's really important for me that I do talk about it, because it is, you have to be made aware. And my life, I lived in complete panic and fear whenever I was at home with him. And then when I was at work, it was fine because I was away from him. And the house that I lived in, my bedroom was on the top floor and the kids' room was a few levels down. So I thought all the abuse and stuff, as long as it's happening in the bedroom, it's fine, the kids won't hear. But the kids obviously did feel the tension, and my now 19-year-old, who's actually wrote a chapter in my book, and she was very adamant to share her story, she felt it and she saw things, and things that a child should never really see. So I've addressed all this stuff in my book, and it is brutally honest, and I do take on, you know, the drugs and the sex, and I explain it because that was my only way of coping.
For me, the interesting stuff was like the tiny little details, like tell us about the table.
Oh, well, my kids weren't allowed to eat at the table, so I...
Why not, though?
Because it was seen as... Well, it's all about control, so he would set rules that I would have to abide by, and some rules were worth fighting about, or I would like to say talking, but some of them were worth fighting for and some of them weren't, because the ramifications of that, especially me, because I'm working and I'm doing live TV, some fights were just not worth the fight, because I'm thinking in my brain, well, I have live TV tomorrow, I don't want to be going on and having to cover up another bruise and make up another lie. So it was
So you were living it within his rules in terms of how he wanted. So the curtains were often closed.
The kids weren't allowed to eat at the dining table.
Kids weren't allowed to eat at the table.
So I bought them a table, and I made sure that
a little
they
fold-up table, yeah?
Yeah, from IKEA, that they were allowed to eat presentably at a table,
you have
just
to
like
hide,
any
you hid
kid.
that from him then?
Yeah, of course I hid that, yeah. There's lots of things that I hid, but that was one of the really sad things about that kind of behaviour that I'd gotten myself into, that he then subjected onto me. And I just wish that there would have been a book out like this for somebody like me then, so I would have read it and gone, OK, so that is coercive behaviour, that's wrong, and that he shouldn't be saying that, and I shouldn't be made to feel like this. Let me get out, let me find a helpline or a refuge. That's why I'm really happy that I've teamed up with Women's Aid too.
And did you talk to, you know, you've been on the show obviously and talked about how close you and the other Spice Girls are. Did they have an inkling? Did they ever ask you a question? Did you ever feel you were this close to confiding in them?
No, because I wasn't ready to admit what was actually going on to myself, let alone to anybody else. And then what do I say? I think to myself, well, who's going to believe me? So you just carry on another day, another week, another month, another year.
I think as well, as soon as you say it to somebody, you have to then almost be seen to be doing something about it.
Got to deal with it,
If you say it to a friend, they'll go, well, you've got to get out of that marriage. What are you doing?
And in fairness to them...
I did leave a few times, but then I went back, and when I did leave, I didn't have the guts or the know-how to talk about it and tell somebody.
And they were sort of part of the isolation as well, weren't they? Because I believe they did try to get in touch with you a few times when a few things made the headlines. But by then you were so isolated, you just ignored them.
Yeah, that's one thing that an abuser does, is they cut you off from your family, your friends, so you really don't have anywhere to turn to. And then you're limited, you're not allowed to, seen as being driving a car, you don't have control over your finances, which doesn't happen just in one big swoop. It just happens bit by bit by bit. So I'd be working and there'd be an accountant meeting. It'd be like, oh, you're at work, I'll go and take that meeting for you. So you think, oh, he's being really nice, when really he's stashing your money somewhere else and taking all your money out of your bank.